I am Jake, a civil engineer, 31 years old, living a seemingly idyllic life in a modest suburban house. My wife, Laura, is 28. Not classically beautiful, but with a striking figure that always turned heads. She is an environmental biologist, smart, funny, and until recently, someone I thought I could trust with my life. But as they say, the devil is in the details. One evening, as Laura slipped into bed beside me after one of her extended monthly meetings with the library board, I reached out to pull her close. My hand brushed the back of her neck, and I stopped, feeling an unexpected dampness. Her skin was cool, not the warmth I was used to after a long day. I tried to shake it off, thinking, it's just sweat. She's been working hard, but the sensation lingered, a strange chill that seemed to cling to me long after we'd settled down. She'd been coming home later and later from these library meetings, mentioning some complex computer project that needed extra hours. And I hadn't thought much of it until tonight. The smell of unfamiliar soap, something floral and sweet, not like her usual mint and rosemary, filled the air. I couldn't help wondering where she'd been. Lying there, with her back turned, I kept picturing that faint dampness on her skin and the smell that didn't belong. It gnawed at me, a tiny piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized was there. Small details, after all, often reveal the biggest cracks. Our marriage had seemed perfect, at least to me, but maybe I'd been blind. After she drifted off, I lay wide awake, my mind racing. Her extended meetings started out as brief, monthly affairs, but for the past 2 months, they'd stretched to 4 hours, sometimes twice a month. And every time she came back, she felt just a little more distant. When I'd asked her about it once, she brushed it off, saying the head librarian, an older, somewhat difficult man, demanded extra time to go over the criteria for their new project. I'd accepted it without a second thought, feeling reassured by her calm tone. But tonight, everything felt different. We hadn't been close in over a week, despite trying for a baby. It was like an invisible wall had grown between us. And that wet, almost slick feeling on her skin, it was like a warning sign I couldn't ignore. As I lay there, I started thinking about all the things that hadn't added up lately. Laura's best friend, Karen, was a divorcee from the next street over. Since we moved in, they'd become close, bonding over everything from shopping to late-night movies. She'd introduced Laura to the library board, and it was Karen who first encouraged her to get out there more. At first, I was glad she had a friend, someone to keep her company while I worked long hours. But lately, even Karen's influence seemed off, almost like she was encouraging Laura to step away from me. The darkness of the room felt suffocating as doubts clawed their way into my mind. Was there something going on behind those library walls? Was there someone else in her life, someone waiting for her to sneak away from our home each month? As the hours crept by, I realized something crucial. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them lying in bed, playing the loyal, oblivious husband. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, moved to the hallway, and made my way downstairs, searching for her purse. The questions were starting to pile up in my mind like storm clouds, and I could feel the first drops of dread beginning to fall. I knew it was risky, creeping around in the dark, searching through my wife's things. But this sense of urgency was unlike anything I'd felt before. I reached the living room, where Laura's purse sat on the armchair she always left it on. Carefully, I lifted the flap and felt around, heart pounding in my chest. I had never done anything like this before. Trust had been the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I'd thought. After rifling through the usual, keys, gum, receipts, I found something that made my breath catch. It was a credit card, tucked into a hidden pocket, but not just any credit card. It had her maiden name, Laura Sanders. My heart sank. Why would she keep a card in her maiden name? We'd consolidated everything years ago. This felt like she was keeping a door open to something, or someone, from her past. And then I found it, a business card, wedged between old receipts. Derek Martin, it read. He was the head librarian. Laura had talked about him vaguely, almost dismissively, as though he were just a minor inconvenience in her workday. Yet here was his card, tucked away like a secret. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't met him in person, but something about the way she'd mentioned him had always seemed carefully controlled, as though she didn't want me to ask too many questions. My gut twisted, but I couldn't let myself jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a harmless connection, something work-related. But there were no innocent explanations for keeping his card stashed away, or for the way she came home smelling like another man's soap. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, careful not to disturb anything that might give away my snooping. Still, I couldn't shake the dread that tightened around my chest like a vice. If there was something going on, I needed proof, solid proof. Just the thought of that made me feel sick, but what other choice did I have? Back in bed, I lay there, listening to Laura's soft breathing. Her face was turned away, lost in dreams, while I lay awake, crushed by 100 suspicions I couldn't shake. I kept telling myself it might all be in my head. But the smell of that soap, that wasn't my imagination. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, watching her every move, looking for cracks in her story. She seemed different. Each time we spoke, I could see her hiding something, like there was a wall between us she couldn't, or wouldn't, let me through. She'd make a small joke, flash her usual smile, and act as though nothing was wrong, but I could feel the lie thickening in the air between us. Then, Friday came, a library meeting night. That afternoon, I decided to call into work and tell them I needed a day off. I didn't offer an explanation. I simply said I had a personal matter and would be working remotely. My mind was already racing with possibilities as I sat there, waiting for Laura to leave. She had no idea I'd be home tonight, or that I'd planned to follow her. When she finally slipped out the door, I gave her a few minutes head start before grabbing my keys and heading to my car. She had mentioned that her meetings were held at the main branch of the library across town, but I was about to find out if that was the real destination. Driving felt surreal, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every time I hit a red light, impatience burned through me. My heart was racing as I neared the library, but as I arrived, my stomach dropped. Her car wasn't there. I circled around, even parked and checked, but the lot was empty. The library looked closed, the windows dark, and a small sign on the door read, "Closed for maintenance." My heart was thundering, louder now than ever. If she wasn't at the library, where was she? I fought the urge to turn around, to let it go and forget all the suspicions, but it was too late for that now. I had to know the truth. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. It rang and rang, each tone dragging my mind deeper into a pit of dread. She finally picked up, her voice casual and a little distracted. "Hey, Jake," she answered, as if nothing was wrong. I fought to keep my voice steady, trying to sound as normal as possible. "Hey, babe," I replied. "I was just finishing up some work stuff and wanted to check in. How's the meeting going?" There was a brief silence, and then she spoke, her voice just slightly off. "Oh, it's fine. We're just going over some things." A pause, then a faint rustling in the background. "I might be a bit late tonight. Don't wait up." "Sure thing. Love you," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Love you too," she replied, and hung up quickly, almost like she was in a hurry. That was all the confirmation I needed. She was lying. I sat in my car, staring at the darkened library, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily on my shoulders. There was no meeting. There never had been. So where was she? My mind was racing, filled with images of her meeting him somewhere, in some dimly lit corner where they thought no one would find them. I clenched my jaw, determination setting in. I wasn't going to sit idly by and let this happen. Tonight, I would find out everything, and there would be no more secrets. I sat there in the car, my mind running wild. Laura had lied, about the meeting, about everything. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was piling up. A strange unease settled over me, an itching sensation that gnawed at my gut. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for not seeing the signs sooner. Every little inconsistency, every subtle shift in her tone, all of it began to make sense now. After a few minutes, I made up my mind. I was done sitting back and watching her spin her web of lies. I was going to follow her, even if it meant driving all over town until I found her. I started the engine and pulled out, adrenaline surging through my veins. The night air was crisp, the city lights blurring past me as I wove through traffic, focused only on tracking her down. I drove past the usual places she frequented, hoping to catch a glimpse of her car. Nothing. No sign of her near the grocery store, the gym, or her friend Karen's house. I didn't have a plan, just raw determination, a need to confront the truth face to face. And then, after nearly an hour of searching, I saw it. Parked at the edge of a quiet, dimly lit street was Laura's car, unmistakable under the glow of a street lamp. I pulled over a safe distance away, heart pounding as I tried to stay calm. The area was unfamiliar. No shops, no restaurants, just a long line of low-rent motels. My stomach twisted, and a sick feeling washed over me as I realized what this might mean. I hadn't wanted to believe it, but the location was making it impossible to ignore. She wasn't running errands. She wasn't even with Karen. She was here, in this godforsaken stretch of town, hiding something she clearly didn't want me to see. Suddenly, I felt a wave of anger surge through me. I'd sacrificed so much to make our life together comfortable, given her everything she ever wanted. And here she was, throwing it all away. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe, to keep my emotions in check. I didn't want to lose control, not yet. I scanned the row of motel rooms, each one marked by a dull, flickering light above its door. There, halfway down the row, I spotted a figure moving near one of the rooms. I couldn't see her face, but something about the way she carried herself, the way her hair caught in the faint glow, told me it was Laura. She moved quickly, almost furtively, glancing over her shoulder before slipping into the room. My heart dropped. She wasn't alone. I could barely make out the shadow of another figure just behind her, a man whose shape and size were unfamiliar. They disappeared inside, and the door closed softly, leaving me staring at the spot where they'd vanished. Every muscle in my body tensed as I fought the urge to storm over there and confront them. But I knew better than to charge in blindly. I didn't want a confrontation that would end in chaos, in regrets. I wanted evidence, proof that couldn't be denied, that would strip away every lie she'd fed me. Sitting there, I felt trapped between rage and helplessness. I wanted to do something, to act, but I also wanted to gather my thoughts, to approach this logically. In a rush, I grabbed my phone and scrolled to the recording app, setting it to voice activate. If she came out, if they said anything I could capture, I'd have it all saved. My mind was racing, formulating a plan. I would wait and watch, let her dig herself deeper into her lies, and then I would confront her with the truth. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. I sat there, staring at the door, half expecting it to open at any moment. But the door remained closed, the motel as silent as a graveyard. The quiet amplified every thought in my mind, making it impossible to ignore the growing certainty of her betrayal. Just when I thought I couldn't stand it anymore, the door opened. Laura stepped out first, her head down, looking almost guilty. She glanced around, as though checking if anyone was watching, before motioning to the man who followed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely unfamiliar. A stranger who'd somehow managed to insert himself into my life without me even realizing it. The anger flared up again, burning hotter than before. I wanted to get out of the car, confront them right then and there. But I held back, biting down hard on my lip to keep myself in check. I needed to know more before I made my move. They said something I couldn't hear, but I managed to snap a quick photo on my phone, capturing their faces illuminated by the dim light above the door. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof, cold and undeniable, that she'd crossed a line I couldn't forgive. Laura got into her car, and I waited until she pulled out of the lot before starting my engine again. I followed her from a safe distance, my mind a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of me wanted to confront her the moment she got home, to throw every accusation in her face. But the rational part of me knew I needed to be careful, to play this out slowly, with precision. I needed her to confess, to feel the weight of her own guilt. As we neared our house, my stomach twisted again. The woman I thought I knew, the life we'd built together, it was all unraveling before my eyes. And as much as it hurt, I knew there was no turning back. I parked a block away from our house, watching as Laura pulled into the driveway. She sat in her car for a moment, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights, staring off into the distance. She looked distant, almost lost, her expression blank and unreadable. I wondered if guilt gnawed at her as it did me, if she felt the weight of what she was doing. But then, she straightened, gathering herself, and got out of the car, the familiar clinking of her keys breaking the silence as she walked up to our front door. I waited for a few minutes before heading inside, giving myself time to calm down, to keep from doing something I might regret. The last thing I wanted was an explosion that would leave everything worse than it already was. My hands were still shaking as I unlocked the door, stepping into the house we had built together, each room filled with memories that now felt hollow, tainted. She was in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge as if she'd just returned from a perfectly normal evening. I watched her for a moment, unnoticed, studying the way she moved, the familiar gestures that now seemed foreign, like watching a stranger go through the motions of someone I once knew. Finally, I cleared my throat and she turned, her face lighting up in a brief smile that quickly faded. "Hey, you're home late," she said, her voice too casual, like she was trying to fill the silence with normalcy. "Yeah, I decided to take a drive." "Clear my head," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady, to mask the anger simmering just beneath the surface. I wondered if she could feel it, sense the tension in the air. But if she did, she hid it well, slipping effortlessly into her usual routine, pouring a glass of water as if nothing had happened. As she sipped, I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. "So, how was the library meeting?" I asked, watching her face carefully. She paused, just for a fraction of a second, before answering. "Oh, it was fine. We went over some more details about the new system, and Derek, he, had a few things he needed my help with." Her voice wavered slightly at his name, and I could see a faint flush rise in her cheeks. She was lying, and she knew I could sense it. The realization was like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral, unwilling to give her any hint of what I knew. Instead, I nodded, acting like I believed her, even as each word twisted the knife deeper. As she continued talking, I found myself sinking deeper into my thoughts, drowning in memories of us. Our wedding, the vows we'd made, the life we'd built together. How had we gone from that to this? How had I missed the signs, the tiny fractures that had been there all along, widening into a chasm that now seemed impossible to bridge? A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to force her to confront the truth she was so desperately trying to avoid. But another part, a quieter, colder part, wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to let her dig herself deeper into her own lies. I wanted her to see what she had done, to feel every ounce of betrayal that I felt. The silence between us stretched, heavy and tense. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Laura," I began, my voice barely more than a whisper, "why do you smell like a different soap?" Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of panic cross her face before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone carefully light. "It's just new body wash. I wanted to try something different." I nodded slowly, but I didn't believe her, not for a second. The lie hung in the air between us, as tangible as the walls that now seemed to close in, shrinking the space we once shared. I realized then that we had crossed a line, one we could never come back from. "I see," I replied, my tone as calm as I could manage. But inside, I was seething, each word another reminder of the betrayal, of the life we'd built slipping through my fingers like sand. That night, I lay awake beside her, the silence pressing down like a weight. Her back was turned, as it had been so many nights recently, her body curled away from me in a way that felt like a wall. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it would end. Two people lying side by side, separated by an unbridgeable gulf of secrets and lies. In the darkness, a plan began to take shape, a way to finally expose the truth, to lay everything bare and force her to face the reality she'd been avoiding. It was time to stop pretending, to stop hiding behind polite conversations and empty reassurances. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I would confront her, no matter the cost. The truth had to come out, and I was done waiting, done playing the role of the oblivious husband. I would make her see the damage she'd done, make her feel every bit of the hurt she had caused. And when the sun rose the next morning, I knew there was no going back. This was the end of us, of the life we'd built, the promises we'd made. The realization hit me like a cold slap, but I welcomed it. It was time to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I woke up with a hardened resolve, ready to confront Laura. But as I got up and made my way down the hall, I saw her already dressed, pacing back and forth in the living room with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was speaking in a hushed tone, her face drawn and tense, a deep line furrowing her brow. I stopped in my tracks, watching her as she paced, oblivious to my presence. "Look, I told you. I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice strained. "If Jake finds out, it'll ruin everything." She paused, listening to the response on the other end, then let out a frustrated sigh. I know what's at stake. I'm doing the best I can." A surge of anger rose up in me. So, she was hiding something. And now I had confirmation straight from her own mouth. My fists clenched at my sides, my mind racing with the implications. But before I could even consider stepping forward to confront her, she ended the call, dropping her head into her hands with a heavy sigh. It was then that I noticed something strange. Laura didn't look relieved or content. She looked afraid. Her shoulders were tense, her hands were trembling, and there was a desperation in her eyes I'd never seen before. This wasn't the face of a woman caught up in a sordid affair. It was the face of someone under immense pressure. She straightened, as though sensing my presence, and turned, her eyes widening as she spotted me standing in the hallway. "Oh, Jake." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't hear you get up. Did you sleep well?" "Couldn't sleep," I replied, watching her carefully, trying to piece together the new puzzle that had fallen into my lap. "Heard you on the phone. You sounded worried. Who were you talking to?" For a brief moment, her expression faltered, and I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. But she quickly recovered, brushing off the question with a casual shrug. "Oh, just Karen. She's going through some things, and I was trying to help her out." I studied her face, searching for the truth hidden in her words. "Funny," I said slowly, "because it sounded like you were talking about me. You said my name. Something about ruining everything if I found out." Her face went pale, her hand tightening on the back of the couch for support. She opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, like she was carefully weighing her next words. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Laura?" I demanded, the frustration and hurt finally spilling over. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you're hiding something from me. And after last night, after what I saw, I can't just ignore it." She stared at me, her eyes wide and pleading, as though she was searching for the right way to explain herself. Finally, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I owe you the truth. But you have to promise me, Jake. You have to promise you'll hear me out before you jump to conclusions." I folded my arms, leaning back against the wall, bracing myself for whatever she was about to reveal. "Fine. I'm listening." She glanced away, as if gathering her thoughts, before finally looking back at me, her gaze intense. "This all started about a month ago. Someone reached out to me. They said they had information about you, about something from your past. They claimed they could hurt you, hurt us, if I didn't cooperate." My heart skipped a beat, confusion mingling with fear as her words sank in. "What are you talking about? Who are they?" "I don't know exactly," she admitted, her voice cracking with frustration. "They wouldn't give me a name or any specifics. All I know is, they've been blackmailing me, Jake. They said if I didn't meet with them, if I didn't do what they asked, they'd ruin you. Ruin us. They know things about you, things I didn't even know." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Blackmail? The idea was absurd, but the look in her eyes told me she was serious. She was genuinely afraid, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. Why go through this alone? We could have handled it together. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I wanted to, Jake, but they told me not to breathe a word to you. They said if I did, they'd expose everything. I thought I could handle it on my own, but it's spiraling out of control. They keep asking for more, and I'm running out of ways to keep up. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything she was telling me. A part of me still wanted to doubt her, to hold on to my anger and suspicion. But looking at her now, I saw the fear etched into her face, the desperation in her eyes. This wasn't an act. She was genuinely terrified. Laura, I said softly, stepping toward her, we can fix this, but you have to tell me everything, every detail, every meeting. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. She nodded, wiping away a tear. There's more. The man I've been meeting, it's Derek. He's the go-between. I don't know who he's working for, but he's the one relaying the messages, making the demands. That's why I kept it a secret from you. I didn't want you to know I was meeting with him, because I knew how it would look. A shiver ran through me, the revelation sending a chill down my spine. So this wasn't just an affair. It was something far darker, something I never could have anticipated. And as I looked at her, I realized that everything I thought I knew had just been turned upside down. I stared at Laura, her words echoing in my head, each one a hammer blow. Blackmail. Derek acting as the middleman. It was almost too much to believe, yet the look in her eyes was too raw, too real to ignore. My anger shifted, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. If she was telling the truth, we were in deep. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice barely steady. I need every detail, Laura. Don't leave anything out. She took a shaky breath, looking down at her hands as if gathering strength. It all started with a letter. About a month ago, I came home to find an envelope on our doorstep. It wasn't postmarked, no address, just my name, handwritten in this scrawled, uneven script. I thought it was junk at first, maybe a flyer or something. Her eyes flickered up to mine, a faint apology lingering there. But then I opened it, and there was a photo. A photo of you, Jake, from years ago. It looked like it was taken when you were still in college. You were with a group of people, but someone had circled you in red ink. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I had no idea what photo she was talking about, but I could sense this was just the start of something much bigger. And that's when the calls started. She continued, her voice a whisper. They would call late at night, never using the same number twice. At first, I thought it was a prank, but then they started mentioning you. They knew things, Jake. Details from your past, things I didn't even know. What details? I demanded, my pulse quickening. What did they say about me? She hesitated, biting her lip. They said they had evidence of things you'd done, that if I didn't cooperate, they'd go public with it, that they'd ruin your reputation, destroy our life together. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. I racked my brain, trying to think of anything from my past that could be used against me, anything that could warrant this level of threat. But nothing came to mind. My past wasn't squeaky clean, sure. Whose is? But there was nothing dark enough to warrant blackmail. What did they want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why involve Derek? Her face twisted in frustration. That's what I couldn't figure out. They never asked for money, just that I keep meeting with Derek. He'd give me instructions, vague things, places to go, times to show up. They wanted me to look guilty, I guess. Like I was hiding something from you. The reality hit me like a slap. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to blackmail us. They wanted to destroy our marriage. They wanted to make me doubt her, to make her look like she was involved in something sinister. And if I hadn't confronted her today, if I hadn't insisted she tell me the truth, they might have succeeded. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the rage bubbling up inside me. So, all those nights you were late, the meetings you couldn't explain, that was all because of them? She nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I was afraid, Jake. I didn't know what else to do. They said if I told you, they'd go after you. I thought I could handle it alone. But it's only gotten worse. They've started calling more frequently, making more demands. And Derek, he's not just some pawn in this. He's enjoying it. He keeps making comments, dropping hints that he knows more than he's letting on. It's like he gets some sick pleasure out of it. I felt a surge of anger at the mention of Derek, imagining him smugly stringing her along, knowing he was tearing our marriage apart. But there was something else here, something deeper. Why would Derek, of all people, want to be involved in something like this? And who was pulling the strings? I stared at Laura, my mind racing, trying to piece together a plan. We can't keep letting them control us. Whoever they are, they're counting on us staying silent, playing by their rules. But if we turn the tables... Her face paled, and she reached out, grabbing my arm. Jake? No. You don't understand. They're dangerous. They know things about you, things they could use to ruin you. Let them try, I said, a new determination hardening inside me. I'm not going to let some nameless threat tear us apart. We're going to find out who's behind this, and we're going to make them pay. She looked at me, her expression torn between relief and fear. But what if they hurt you? Or worse? They won't, I replied, more confidently than I felt. We just need to stay one step ahead of them. We'll start by looking into Derek. If he's the go-between, he knows who's behind this, and he'll lead us straight to them. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the lingering doubt, but slowly, she nodded, a glimmer of hope flickering to life. Okay, she whispered. We'll do it together. It was strange, the way our roles had reversed. Just a day ago, I'd been the one filled with suspicion, drowning in doubt. And now, standing together in the quiet of our living room, we were united, bound by a common enemy. I pulled her into my arms, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease as she rested her head against my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of calm, a sense of purpose. We weren't beaten yet, but as we stood there, a new thought struck me, one that sent a shiver down my spine. If they'd gone this far to manipulate us, to dig into my past, then whoever was behind this wasn't just out to ruin our marriage. They had a reason, a grudge they weren't willing to let go. And if that was true, this was only the beginning. As the night wore on, Laura and I stayed up, poring over every detail we could remember, trying to find any lead that would point us toward whoever was behind this. Derek was the only link we had, and it was clear he knew more than he was letting on. If we wanted answers, we'd have to confront him directly. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I didn't tell Laura, but I knew she suspected where I was headed. The plan was risky, but I couldn't see any other way forward. Derek needed to understand that this game he was playing was over. I drove to the library, the parking lot nearly empty in the early morning light. I spotted Derek's car parked off to the side, and I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the confrontation. I had no idea how he'd react, but I was done playing by his rules. When I walked in, he was alone, his back to the door as he sorted through stacks of books. The library was silent, the only sound the soft shuffle of his movements as he worked. I approached him slowly, letting my footsteps echo across the empty room. He didn't turn until I was only a few feet away, and when he did, his face twisted into a smug grin. "Jake," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "I wasn't expecting you so early. Lost your way?" I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Cut the act, Derek. I know what you've been doing, and I'm here to put an end to it." His grin faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, crossing his arms and leaning back against the table with a casual air. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe you should ask Laura if you're feeling confused." My jaw tightened, the anger I'd kept bottled up boiling over. "Enough games. I know you've been meeting with her, feeding her lies, manipulating her into thinking she had to do what you wanted. Who are you working for, Derek? Why go through all this trouble just to tear us apart?" For a moment, he just stared at me, as though weighing his options. Then, he laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed through the empty library. "You really don't get it, do you, Jake? This isn't about you. It's never been about you. You're just collateral damage." He leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "There are people who have been waiting for this moment for years. People you crossed without even realizing it. and they've finally found a way to get what they want. I took a step back, confusion and anger swirling inside me. What are you talking about? Who did I cross? He shrugged, feigning innocence. That's not for me to say. I'm just here to do my part, to make sure you and Laura keep playing your little roles. And you've done beautifully, by the way. All that suspicion, the doubts. It's exactly what they wanted. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, the weight of his words settling over me like a dark cloud. Someone wanted revenge, someone from my past I couldn't even remember. And they'd used Derek to pull us apart, to set us against each other without us even realizing it. But as I stood there, anger simmering in my chest, a plan began to form in my mind. If Derek wanted us to play our roles, we'd play them, but on our terms. You know what, Derek? I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. You're right. I don't know who's behind this. But here's the thing. You're the one standing here, not them. And you're the one who's going to be on the hook when this all comes crashing down. He frowned, his confidence wavering. What are you talking about? I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You really think I don't have evidence? You think I've been sitting back, letting you manipulate my wife without doing anything about it? Every text, every call, every time you showed up, you're the one who's exposed, Derek. Not me. He paled, his smug expression faltering as he realized I wasn't bluffing. I didn't actually have anything on him yet, but he didn't know that. I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, the way his hands trembled as he backed away from me. You wouldn't dare, he stammered, his voice shaky. You don't know who you're dealing with, Jake. These people, they won't stop. They'll come after you, after Laura. You'll regret it. Let them try, I replied, my voice cold. But when this is over, you'll be the one answering for it. Now, tell me who's behind this. Or so help me, I'll make sure you're the one who regrets it. He swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling as he realized he'd lost control. For a long moment, he just stood there, his face pale and sweaty. And then, with a defeated sigh, he finally spoke. All right, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. There's someone. A man named Bennett. He's the one pulling the strings. He's been watching you for years, Jake. Ever since, well, you'd know better than me. All I know is that he's been waiting for this chance. Where can I find him? I demanded, feeling a surge of triumph as the truth finally came to light. Derek shook his head, backing away slowly. I don't know. I've only ever spoken to him over the phone. But he's watching. He's always watching. And if you try to come after him, he'll destroy everything you have left. I didn't bother responding. I'd gotten what I needed. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving Derek standing there, his face ashen, his confident facade shattered. When I got home, Laura was waiting, her face filled with worry. I told her everything Derek had said, the truth finally laid bare between us. She listened, her face pale, her hands shaking as she absorbed the full weight of what we were up against. Jake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What are we going to do? I took her hand, squeezing it tightly, feeling a renewed sense of determination. We're going to stop him, Laura. Together. And when this is over, no one will ever come between us again. We spent the next few days planning, laying out every detail, preparing for the confrontation we knew was coming. It wouldn't be easy, but we were ready. And when Bennett finally showed his hand, we'd be waiting, ready to end this once and for all. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that Laura and I were united in our fight. Whatever the past held, whatever secrets and grudges lay buried, we would face them together, stronger than ever.